The talk of the Nintendo town right now is all about a new Switch model. This idea that in 2019, Nintendo could release an upgraded Nintendo Switch console with 4K capabilities amongst other upgrades. Now, let's be clear, we are not even considering this rumor in any capacity, but the entire dilemma, discussion, and debate that arose around it, it's still very interesting, Gabe.
Yeah, and that part is hard to ignore, right? We can ignore the rumor because it's not true in the slightest. But the conversation that's spun off both on Reddit and Twitter in a multitude of ways is all very interesting. Some people are like super against like these people bringing this up, but we want to focus more on what we think the scenario would be where Nintendo would iterate on the Switch and maybe when it's likely to happen and how, because this way that they're talking about it now, it's not the case.
For sure. Let me give you guys some context here, bring you up to speed. What happened was, it originates kind of from two sources. One, Super Metal Dave 64 on Twitter said, yes, new portable hardware that is more powerful, able to play the current Switch software. The naming thing is up to YouTube. They are wacky when it comes to names, so it's anyone's guess if they call it Switch something or not. And then Marcus Sellers on Twitter gave a much more granular take, saying Nintendo will be releasing an improved version of the Nintendo Switch early 2019. This console will have 8 GB of RAM, 128 GB of internal storage, and dynamic scaling up to 4K. Some third-party games will only release on this version. All Nintendo-produced games will release on both. And immediately there was a whole lot of response. Some people were taking this as fact and very excited, like, oh my god, a new Switch, that sounds great. And some people instantly were like, no, this is not true. And that's not really what I want to get into. I want to get into more, like we said, like the conceptual thought behind this and where it may eventually lead. Obviously not right now. And just to give you a little bit more, Per Schneider from IGN said, hey Marcus, just saw this, that's totally made up, don't trust or repeat everything you hear. And Liam Robertson jumped on that train as well, letting people know that it's absolutely not true. And eventually Marcus Sellers took the tweets down.
Yeah, and
so
I want to be clear that's a train we're on, by the way. I want to make that perfectly clear.
Yeah, this is not a video to debate if a 4K Switch is coming in 2019. But what is part of the discussion is the reasons why that wouldn't happen, and then why it or when it could. And let's get the first part out the way. Like, Nintendo is doing very well for themselves right now. They have some of their biggest franchises debuting in a couple of months, and there's no way that they would completely undermine that with a brand new version of Switch that would invalidate and upset all customers in the holiday season.
Yeah, there's no point in cannibalizing your audience in that way. That's not something you want. You don't want to divide them that much. Of course, other platforms have done it with, PS4 Pro, Xbox One X being an example, but that came much later in their lifespan, and that's what I can see Nintendo do. Like, at some point way later, they can do something to make the Switch a little bit more up to par with things that we know are like looming in the industry. But for the time being, you're not gonna like step on the toes of a platform that A, you haven't given a price cut to whatsoever. B, you like are probably making decent money on this because the components in here are not like super like advanced the same way that some of the other platforms are. So you want to keep this thing's at 300, and I'm sure they're making a decent like profit on that.
Right. I mean, and I think just at an even more basic level, like splitting the audience and saying that, some games will only work, some third-party games will only release on the new version, and Nintendo-produced games will release on both. And, the PS4 Pro, if you look, it really wasn't that much later in the life cycle in comparison, but there's no only PS4 Pro games, and the entire... like, the mindset and emphasis of a PS4 is to produce the top-tier graphical and top-tier console, right? And that's not what Nintendo's up to. And it doesn't make sense for a number of reasons. And let's get into some of the more technical aspects. Saying that, like, it would be 4K docked, right now the dock is doing nothing. So a boosted dock, while we have heard that rumor, or that theory for a while, I don't see it being a thing. I don't see Nintendo trying to like separate this system into two very disparate parts where things only work one way or the other. And like another point is a lot of this I think originates from some of the filings we've seen for new Nintendo Switch models. And we know that they made a slight adjustment to address piracy and homebrew. But I don't believe that, like, reading into it any more than it's a slight adjustment, I think is silly at this point. I don't think that they are, prepping the factories for, like, this mass production of a brand new Switch.
Yeah, and, if we want to maybe touch on Nintendo's history of doing this just a tad with, 3DS and new 3DS, and how there's, like, exclusive games for that in the form of Xenoblade and some of the virtual console stuff that is only available on new 3DS. It wasn't available on the older stuff. Like, that didn't seem to be a fruitful endeavor for them. It didn't work well. It kind of, like, fragmented the audience, and they didn't do it more than once or twice for, like, things that are like, hey, you can only do Xenoblade on the new 3DS. You can't play on the old one. That quickly went out the window. So I don't know why they would do something that didn't work, like, the first time, and, like, maybe do it again on a grander scale. It doesn't make too much sense to me, especially when you have this success.
Right. They have a history of upgrading and iterating on their handhelds. It's not something they've done for home consoles. And frankly, it's not something that the industry saw until, recently, like the Xbox One X and PS4 Pro being mid-steps. Like, it's a big deal for a reason, because it's not something that we're very familiar with. The new 3DS was a slight upgrade. It improved load times, it improved battery life, it added the C-Stick as a permanent part of the console instead of just a Circle Pad Pro attachment. And as you mentioned, like, it didn't bear a whole lot of fruit in terms of exclusive titles. And so I think that was their lesson learned of, like, okay, that's not going to work. And dividing your audience, I mean, the Switch is insanely successful. It sold over 20 million units at this point. Their forecasts are still incredibly high. Saying to all those people that, hey, you've been waiting for third party, but guess what? You can't play them. Like, that is a disastrous move for a company that has achieved near perfection when it comes to, like, hearts and minds of gamers, and you don't blow that up. I also don't think that it is in Nintendo's nature to preempt this strictly from a technical standpoint. Like, it is not like them to make a major move specifically to try and get ahead technically.
Well, they wouldn't be getting ahead. They'd be they'd be preemptively getting on the same playing field. Yeah,
but making, like, a technical driven move.
That's not yeah.
And again, like, I don't want to get into the every little nuance, but the idea that the dock, like, that's just such a murky. I think form factor, eventually maybe something shifts, but we saw Leaky Pandy get in on this and say that 2021 is more where they would believe it to be, and I'm way more akin to believe a 2021 version of a Switch than an early 2019 version. I mean, this thing would be announced. There's no way they just drop a console like February or March 2019. It's just not. I think we can put to bed all the reasons why this is not a thing.
Yeah, I mean, or it's gonna be September in a couple of weeks. The holiday season's gonna start. Yeah, you don't want some, like, surprise console coming early next year, and you also don't. It's not announced now because, hey, then you're gonna have people, like, wait and not buy the Switch this holiday season. Yeah. Like, it just doesn't line up in a lot of ways. No. So,
forward looking though, do we think that this kind of an idea, that this, okay, if we take this model, not the literal Switch model, but, like, the model of what they're proposing here, is that something that you see Nintendo moving towards eventually, or do we feel that if there was a change, it would be more of a form factor or a convenience rather than a power upgrade?
Yeah, I don't think you can, like, it's very hard for me to see a situation where they can, like, successfully, like, make it about power. Reggie and, Nintendo themselves are very open about, like, that's not a race that they're running. They want to provide fun, and they want to provide fun to as many people in the family as possible. And if it's, like, 1440p or, like, 4K, like, they don't care. At least not now. I'm sure for the next console, like, something's gonna need to happen. We can't have the next console be 1080p while everything else just keeps, ballooning. But for the time being, like, mid-cycle, this, like, drastic change like that, it's gonna be so off-putting even to developers. Like, so much of the success for Switch is indies. Like, what you can do as an indie studio, like, now you're, like, developing, like, not like two versions, but you have to have, like, a really, like, upscaled version of, like.
I don't know that it would impact all games. I just think that anytime you consider splitting the base and saying that certain games are only going to work on a certain model, I think that should be tossed out. I feel like consistency and like congruency is important in Nintendo, important to all companies, right? We don't see Sony saying like, hey, PS4 Pro only God of War, or Microsoft saying Xbox One X only Forza. What are their exclusives?
They have a bunch of controllers.
Yes, Halo Infinity is going to be, or Halo Infinite is going to be. No, like I can see. I definitely like. I think that at some point a power upgrade for Switch is totally feasible.
But do you think it goes into the realm of 4K, even if it's upscaling and not native? Like that just doesn't like.
I don't know what you like. What is the in between? Like, hey, it's 1080p handheld as well, or like it's
the screen's not 1080p handheld. So, I mean, unless you have a new screen, I guess.
Yeah, so
because right now, as the Switch stands, that screen in handheld is not 1080p. It's 720. Like we know that. So
I would say like the greatest success Nintendo has had with iterations has been on form factor or convenience. Yes, they did do the new 3DS. In fact, their current push is a reductive system. The 2DS is removing features.
Yeah.
I don't think we get removal of features from the Switch unless it's like a handheld only Switch that the Joy-Con are permanently glued on. But that's kind of a different conversation. I do think this is an opportunity for them to make a power upgrade. I just don't think it's anytime soon. And no matter like when you want it to happen, I feel like this is something that Nintendo absolutely waits for next gen to be birthed before they jump the gun. Because again, like from a company standpoint that has a history of making a lot of money and is currently killing it, taking that risk of blowing up your current success is just not something you do.
All right, 2019 not happening. 2021, no. 2021, the leaky panty like tweet. Let's just pretend that that's like more feasible, right?
Right.
But by 2021, you got to assume PS5's out.
Right.
Or at the very least close to being out. Same for whatever next Xbox is happening.
Right.
So then at that point, iterating on the Switch just to make it like slightly more powerful, you're still going to be outshined by those new things anyways. So it's smart for Nintendo to just wait for the next gen and figure it out then. Find another creative way for people to play and another like creative thing to do, because that's what Nintendo does. You can't compete with these companies on a graphical level. Like, it's not happening.
Right, but a boost would allow you to maybe, be part of the conversation, at least when it comes to ports and things of that nature. As we talked about previously and recently, it would be very difficult for, the PS5 version of, it's to me, it's far less likely that even Panic Button can put the PS5 version of Bethesda titles onto the Switch, right? That's a lot more daunting, and so maybe you do make that move. At that point, to me, I think a big portion of this is how Nintendo's R&D and what their idea is with their new handheld. The idea that maybe there is a successor to the 3DS. I think that plays a large role. When does that come? What does it do? And how does that then help dictate the Switch conversation and the Switch evolution? I don't think that we get like a new console in 2020 or 2021. I think that their idea that they want to elongate the Switch cycle and sort of stick with this idea makes sense. But even though it would be less precedented, I do believe that a power update is to me where I would see Nintendo going with an iteration on this console.
Yeah, I hope I don't get hate for this, but it seems like the way it's going to play out is going to end up where Nintendo's very comfortable, where like, hey, like, X amount of years has passed, we're still focusing on Switch for our development efforts, but by that point, third parties moving on, and again, Nintendo's comfortable with not having third party support. They're familiar with that. It's a position they've been in before, so they want them now. That's clear. Because, Doom Eternal's coming. They have a lot of partnerships. Like, cool. Mm-hmm. But once people move on to the next thing, there's like you said, it's going to be impossible.
Yeah, because the difference here, and why this is to me so different than like a PS4 Pro or an Xbox One X, and why there is, to me, much more pause into how they do this, is those were to get ahead, and this would be to catch up. And I think that's like a very different strategy and a very different mindset, and then therefore creates very different results, right? Like if your thing is to get ahead and just like enhance what's already there, okay. But if your thing is to try to make up ground, you're making up ground because the original isn't good enough. And so then it does become, like a Switch 1.5 or a Switch 2 that does have exclusive titles, and the taste in their mouth from new 3DS still has to be there. And maybe they find a better way to do it, but you know, the more we discuss this, it's like maybe they don't. Maybe they're fine with where they're at, and by not matching the technical prowess of the other platforms, you are taking a risk, and Nintendo has been comfortable taking this risk for.
I mean, yeah, but then you're like
generations.
Yeah, but then you're like sweeping, like as far as indies go, right? Indies are gonna want to be on your platform. We even now like we see like so many of these like Switch indies. Hey, exclusives with Switch and Steam.
Oh, exactly.
So
that's what I'm saying. Maybe they're comfortable in the pocket they're in, and they don't feel a need to move. And maybe even come 2020, 2021, maybe the upgrade then isn't this. Maybe it's just more slight than we're expecting, and maybe it doesn't have as much of a sweeping impact as. I don't know. I can't see a scenario where they want to split the user base unless enough time has passed that they feel confident releasing what is basically a next.
Yeah. So then, system. Like at that point, why don't you just like release like your next generation of hardware and make it backwards compatible if you still really want Switch games to work. But even then, like what form of like media is this going to use? It's still going to be those cartridges, because even now, like the
4K cartridges.
Yeah, the bigger cartridges, like. People have to download extra stuff because those aren't really like widely available yet, and you're gonna need even bigger cartridges if you're gonna eventually like have, even if it's just upscaled 4K, like it's not native. That's still like a lot of like stuff that needs to be on a cartridge. So yeah, there's a lot that goes into this, and
unless there's a way to do this that maintains the library parity while not maintaining a spec or a performance parity. I'm fine with that. I think that's totally doable. But then it gets in weird territory. So I'm
very curious what people think about this. What you guys like an upgrade to the Nintendo Switch? I'm gonna go out on a limb and say I'm cool. Like, give me more like cool RPGs and like smaller like games. I'm fine with that. I hate to say this, but the big experiences can be had elsewhere. Nintendo, get all your ducks in a row for next gen and make sure that's like super awesome, and let Switch breathe. Let Switch continue to do what it's doing well, and maybe double down on that. That would be what I would want, but who knows?
Yeah, I think in discussing this, I feel like a power upgrade is plausible and maybe even likely, but it's going to have to be in a way that the goal is not to separate or to chase, but rather just to enhance. And in that case, yeah, I think a 2020, 2021 update is possible, but I don't think it's going to be this pie in the sky. Some games, this, like, I don't know really what they do. But I think, again, tying a nice bow on this, what's interesting here is not the rumor and whether it's valid or not, but the discussion that has arisen and the plausibility or potential it makes for the future. And that's what we want to know, like Gabe mentioned, what you guys think, and if you would want an upgraded Switch and how you think this goes or where you think it goes. A couple, I guess it would be 2-3 years down the line from now. We got a lot of time to figure this out. For now, nothing to worry about. Breathe easy. Your Switch is just fine. You're going to play Smash and Mario Party and Pokemon, and next year you'll play hopefully Metroid and Fire Emblem and some other fun stuff, and you won't have
Bayonetta. We keep forgetting about Bayonetta, man.
Bayonetta 3.
It's happening, man.
And also the No More Heroes game that completely...
Wait, that's coming this year?
Yeah, well. Anyhow, while we debate the rest of these weird titles, definitely subscribe to stay updated on all the latest and greatest from the Switch. And big to-dos like this, we've got you covered. It's always interesting to see where the community is going and what the sort of the conversation is. And then for all of us to give our take. Follow us on Twitter and Discord if you want to give more takes and get more takes. There's a lot of takes. And we would love to share those with you and hear yours as well. For myself and Gabe, though, until next time, thanks so much for watching. Fantastic day. Switch Force out.